Now that the survival mode to Space Engineers 2 has been added, the next update, Vertical Slice 2.2, is going to focus on additions to the survival mode that everyone has been asking for, such as wheels, pistons and rotors, weapons, and most importantly, rebindable keys. We've recently been told that this update has entered a freeze state of development, where they stop adding features to the update and work on polishing the update and fixing bugs. In the past, these freeze states normally last for a month, so that means that the 2.2 update will probably release in around a month's time, likely the 16th or the 23rd of March. So you won't have to wait too long to get your hands on everything we're about to talk about. We've recently been shown a number of new blocks, which I'm cycling through here. However, rather than boring you by going through each of the blocks individually and talking about how amazing they look, I want to draw your attention to a couple of interesting ones, including one super important new block that we 100% need to talk about. So let's get started with mechanical blocks. Here you can see visual examples of the small piston, and you can see that it's longer than its Space Engineers 1 counterpart, going to 5 meters. And I also like this indication of how long it's going on the side as well. That's pretty cool. And then we also have the rotor here, having both the large rotor and the small rotor. And I know what you're thinking, oh, well, you're just seeing pictures of them. We want to actually see them spinning and moving. Well, for the rotor, we actually have these. Here's a video of the rotor spinning in engine, and then here's a video of the rotor spinning in game. I know lots of people are excited for the mechanical blocks to be added to Space Engineers 2, so don't worry, you don't have much longer to wait now. And for those asking about the hinge, whilst we've seen pictures of it, we know it's not coming in this next update, but considering we have seen images of it, I would assume that we can expect that soon as well. Maybe in a Vertical Slice 2.3 or later. One new block that caught me by surprise was the new wind turbine design. Whilst it looks fairly standard, you'll note at the top that it has a circular bit that it looks like you can place a second wind turbine on top of. And if we come to this video here, you can see that wind turbines can be stacked up on top of each other, which is so much better than when in Space Engineers 1, if you wanted to place down wind turbines, you'd have to build these super weird looking trees to maximize the amount of free space for them. But now you can just stack a bunch of wind turbines in a row, and not only will it be space efficient, it'll also look really good. If there's one thing that always gets me about Space Engineers 2, it's that I love spinning things, and wind turbines are obviously a big part of that. Here we have a new block, which we're not really sure what it does. It's called a capacitor, and obviously I know what a capacitor does in real life, but in Space Engineers, what is a capacitor going to do? There's a large grid version and a small grid version, and presumably with the name capacitor, it's going to have something to do with power, whether it be for power storage or power transfer. So I tell you what, rather than me speculating about it, how about you let me know what you think it's going to do in the comment section below this video. Here we have the trade terminal, which confirms that economy will be base game in Space Engineers 2, and also it appears that neon tubes will be base game in Space Engineers 2 as well, which is good because I really like neon tubes, and additionally, with ray tracing, these neon tubes are going to look even better, and I say that as someone who really isn't a big fan of ray tracing in games. On top of that, with Space Engineers 2's new building system, you can place on a 25cm grid rather than the 2.5 meter one of Space Engineers 1, and with this, I'm imagining you can use neon tubes to write out letters and stuff to create things like neon signs to detail your space saloons at a more reasonable size. But as I said, there was one block that was very important that I needed to tell you about. You can see it on screen here, but you're probably looking at it and thinking, what is this? I don't understand. It's just some circular block. Look down here, you see this? This is the cable trim block. You heard that right, cable is coming to Space Engineers 2. Absolute cinema. It's unclear which part of this block is the actual cable trim, and the fact that it's curved is very interesting, as there's not a lot of curved blocks in Space Engineers 2. But if I had to guess, due to the new 25cm grid system, as I was saying earlier, we can place down lights or control panels in basically any gap where there's space. I assume these cable trim blocks will be the start of a new set of detailing blocks, where they serve no function in game, but because of the advancements of the grid system, you can use them to detail up your grids. A bit like how we expect neon tubes to work in Space Engineers 2 as well. But Keen, while I appreciate you adding cable to the game, you know this isn't the cable I was referring to, right? It's definitely very cool, don't get me wrong, but you know, cable. One of the big things coming in the Vertical Slice 2.2 update is weapons. Now, so far we'd only seen concept art of the weapons, but here you can see the Gatling turret in game moving around and stuff. I've always hated the Space Engineers 1 base game Gatling turret design, and this design is just so much better in every single way. And again, we're talking about the new grid system a lot in this video, but in the dev diary where they were talking about Gatling turrets, they said that we were able to place these much closer together than we were in Space Engineers 1. Turrets in Space Engineers 1 were 3x3, which meant you had this big gap between them if you wanted to place them near each other, but in Space Engineers 2, it appears you'd be able to place them much closer together. Now, they have said that they were testing placing them right next to each other, and they said that looked a little weird, so it sounds like you're not going to be able to place them right up closer together, but there will definitely no longer be this massive gap between them like there was in Space Engineers 1. We finally received our first in-game look at the rocket launcher, which is looking pretty good here. I really like how you can see the plume of the rocket coming out the back here when it fires. Previously, you've only seen renders of the rocket launcher outside of the game, and often alongside this rifle that you can see here, and we're still yet to see this rifle in game as well. And additionally, we've recently received concept art for the interior turret as well. but again, not an in-game look. So I would assume that when this update drops, we're probably going to get the Gatling turret, the rocket turret, which we haven't seen yet, the interior turret, and then an assortment of hand weapons, just so we have the basics of combat in the game. And then we've been told in the past that they're currently theory crafting how to have a better, more balanced combat system in the future that resolves a lot of the issues with SE1 combat. Right, that's the new blocks out of the way. The next thing to talk about is rocks. Big rocks. Specifically, moons that are coming to Space Engineers 2. This teaser was released on the Space Engineers newsletter, and it shows a lunar lander landing on the surface of the new moon in Space Engineers, Palatine, which, when added to the game, will orbit Verger, the Earth-like planet. Which makes sense, as Verger, looks like Earth, and Palatine appears to be very similar to our real-life moon. In fact, it looks disturbingly similar to our real-life moon. The moon in Space Engineers 1 was very similar to our real-life moon, with having lots of craters in the same place. So I'm assuming that this is probably going to be a bit more different, as it's not specifically meant to be our moon. Specifically, what I'm thinking about is the fact that Verger has lots of landmarks on it that are based on real-life landmarks on Earth, but are blended to fit with the unique geography on the planet. So I'm assuming that Palatine might have some of these landmarks as well. The two that come to mind are the Sea of Tranquility and the Tycho crater, which are two big landmarks on our moon. So maybe we'll have something similar, and maybe like Space Engineers 1, there'll be a big black obelisk standing in the Tycho crater with some mysterious text written on the side. And maybe the community will once again spend the next 7 years trying to figure it out. Chemic, our Mars-like planet, will also be receiving a moon as well, although we haven't actually seen pictures of this yet. With Chemic being a Mars-like planet, presumably it's going to mirror Phobos or Deimos, and the moon itself we believe will be called Caligo. We know that a moon called Caligo is coming to Space Engineers 2, but we haven't been told explicitly that it's going to be Chemic's moon, so potentially Verger has 2 moons, but I'm leaning more likely to it being Chemic's moon. I have a theory that Caligo is going to be quite a cloudy planet, as one of the things they've been showing off recently is these super dense cloud and fog experiments, which you can see here, and it doesn't seem like these kinds of clouds of fog would appear on Verger or Palatine. And if Chemic is a Mars-like planet, Mars isn't typically known for these dense cloud formations, so perhaps these cloud formations are being designed for Caligo, or perhaps Chemic is being moved away from a Mars-like planet to be its own sort of thing. That aside though, I do think these clouds and fog experiments do look really good, but I do have concerns they might not necessarily be fun to play in, as it appears that your visibility will be next to nothing. This example here though, with the formations in the sky, that does look really pretty. We've been told in the past that Delphos, the brown dwarf at the centre of our map, will have a killing field around it, which we've recently been shown how it will look, and as you get closer, the screen will get more red to show that it's getting more deadly, until eventually when you get too close and you and your ship will explode. This is probably work in progress, so this isn't the final version that'll be added to the game, but I think it'd be more fun if rather than your ship just exploding completely if you get too close, that instead your ship slowly takes damage over time, and bits of it start to break off and get flown around, something, not to worry, we're still flying half a ship. Would it serve any gameplay purpose? No, not really. But would it look very cool? Hell yes it would. One of the big things they're working on for this next update is the new weather effects, specifically rain, sandstorms, and wind. And what's interesting compared to Space Engineers 1, where weather would sort of just appear randomly, weather appears to be on a more real-time system, where there are clouds that go across the sky of Verger, which I really like that you can actually see them from space. And then when they're above you, it starts to rain. And these clouds are also biome sensitive, as when the clouds get to a desert, the clouds will disperse, as obviously the reason it is a desert is because it rains very infrequently there. One important thing to mention though is the developers have spoke about wind, not just in the terms that wind will interact with particles, as you can see here in the dust storm it's blowing around the little dust particles, but specifically they've said, whilst it's not implemented yet, that wind will be able to blow grids around, which is very interesting. Obviously we'll have to see this in game to see how it works, but I imagine if you're flying a ship around and you don't have a particularly great amount of thrust, that the wind will be able to blow your ship around, potentially blowing it off course, or just adding general turbulence to your travel. Perhaps this is a way they could incentivize rovers, as particularly in a desert, if you're unable to fly through a sandstorm as it reduces your visibility and additionally blows your ship around, perhaps it'd be more beneficial for you to drive a rover around through the desert instead. Some of you eagle-eye viewers may have actually noticed something during that last video, as when they looked up to the sky, they saw this massive ring in the distance, and that's because they're adding asteroid rings to Space Engineers 2. Now immediately it's worth noting that these asteroid rings aren't done, the designs for them are not finished yet, these are just designs to test that the system works, but the idea will be when they're added to the game, that there'll be a ring around the planet, and as you get close the ring will fade out, and instead of seeing the ring you'll see the asteroids instead. I do wonder if they'll use this to reduce the amount of asteroids in space, as it's always been a bit weird that there's just infinite asteroids out there in the depths of space, and localizing them all to this asteroid ring will be a very interesting way to get around that. And additionally, I've always been a big fan of being able to see large celestial objects in the distance, especially whilst you're on a planet, like how in Space Engineers 1 where you could easily make out Mars in the distance, and how you can clearly see Delphos in the sky wherever you are in Space Engineers 2. It just adds that Skyrim-esque feeling of, you see that planet over there? You can fly to that. So being able to walk around and just see this asteroid ring from the surface of Verger, assuming the asteroid ring stays on Verger, it's just something that I find super cool. Most of the screenshots for these rings show them around Verger, the Earth-like planet, but there are a couple of instances where it appears around Chemic as well. So at this time we're unsure if the rings will be around Verger or Chemic. Probably not both of them, as that'd be a little bit overkill, but it's something I'm looking forward to nonetheless. Here's a screenshot showing Rebindable keys in Space Engineers 2. You can see that we have our control on the left and then our keybind in the middle, and presumably by this it looks like you can have multiple keybinds for each key. And the developers have said they're not sure this will cover absolutely every single use case that players will have for key binding in the game, but once it's released they'll collect feedback, so if there's any other key binding options that players want, they'll add them later on. And additionally, in the controls, but they haven't actually shown a screenshot of this, they've said they're adding a separate volume slider for tool volume, and oh, that's going to be so good. Space Engineers 1, obviously tools are super obnoxiously loud, and even in Space Engineers 2, whilst it's not as loud, it's so oppressive that it just makes my brain turn off when I'm drilling. I can't listen to the drilling and speak at the same time. The GPS system is receiving an update to give it all the features that Space Engineers 1 had, such as the ability to modify coordinates of a marker and the ability to copy markers to your clipboard and paste them to other players. Obviously not that useful at the moment without multiplayer though. However, a new feature of the GPS markers is the ability to group them, and this is one of those features I've always wanted for Space Engineers 2, as when I have all those markers for ore deposits, I just want to be able to turn them all on and off in one go, rather than clicking each individual ore marker and turning them off. And this, combined with other changes to GPS markers which you've seen in previous developer posts, pretty much fixes all of my issues with markers in Space Engineers. It can't come soon enough. And the final thing to mention about Vertical Slice 2.2 before we move on to the next updates after this are the additions of more contracts. With the addition of new weapons, this obviously opens up the option for more combat-related contracts. And additionally, independent in these vertical slices, we've actually received updates that have added more contracts into the game as well, adding new sectors to the game. You received an update late last year that added the Oblavara sectors to the game, which came with a couple of contracts. And then a few weeks ago, we received an update that added the Helionis sectors to the game, which also included a couple of contracts. I plan to release a video shortly where we go through the contracts in the Chemic sector, the Obliviara sector and the Helionis sector, just so we can all get caught up with all the content that's currently in the game, as contracts are one of the things that I'm most interested in Space Engineers 2, as these contract quests, combined with the colonization system, are the primary gameplay loop for players that want a purpose to their actions in the game. So, if you want to see a video where we go over those sectors and contracts, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to keep up to date with everything on this channel. Now, despite me mentioning it at the beginning of the video, you might have noticed there was one thing that we didn't mention during the Vertical Slice 2.2 section of this video, and that was wheels. Wheels will be coming in Vertical Slice 2.2, but we've been told that it'll be the first playable prototype of the wheels, and the full wheel system will come out later in a Vertical Slice 2.3, which will obviously be releasing after 2.2. Now, because of this, we haven't actually seen a lot of wheels. We've seen this screenshot here showing off the visuals of the wheels and the suspensions. And then we have this video here of them moving a wheel up and down the suspension, and then additionally left to right later on. But by the fact they haven't actually shown them as in-game, I would assume they're not in a state that they want to show us. However, as I said, they're still planned for that 2.2 update. They just won't be the final version of them when they're added in that update. We're not aware of what else will be in the 2.3 update. Currently, we're just expecting tweaks to the stuff added in 2.2. And additionally, it's worth noting that what we spoke about in this video so far isn't everything coming in 2.2 and 2.3. We covered a bunch more features that are coming soon in my video on the 2026 Space Engineers 2 roadmap, so don't forget to check out that video after this one to be fully up to date. But now for the updates I'm most excited for, water. Vertical Slice 3 will be releasing later this year, and this is the update that's going to add water to the game. I recently did a video where we looked at the volumetric water that is hidden inside the last update for Space Engineers 2, and despite the fact that it's not finished, it's actually really impressive. So if you want to see the water in action, check that video out after this one. In that video I included a lot of the new water footage we've received recently. However, interspersed in that water footage is also new footage of the water planet Byblos. Byblos won't be an entirely water planet. It will have polar caps at the top and the bottom, where there'll be this icy snowy area, and additionally have a number of volcanic islands, some of which will be more rocky, and some of them will be more mossy due to the dampness of the planet. And these images of Byblos and the videos that we've seen of the planet look absolutely amazing. I really like Verger and I really like Chemic, but both of them are planets that we've kind of seen before. They look really good, don't get me wrong, but Byblos with these volcanic mossy islands really feels like an alien place. I know it's technically based on the terrain of Iceland, but that is because Iceland kind of feels like an alien place anyway. One thing they've mentioned is that there'll be sulfur on these mossy islands. Now, whether that means there'll be a sulfur-like effect, where the voxels are like yellowed and there's steam coming out, or they mean that sulfur is a new material that we can collect, I'm not really sure. It's not really clear from what they've said, but it's just something very interesting to keep in mind. And on top of pictures of the surface of Byblos, we've also been shown pictures of underwater. Now, I'm not necessarily sure if these are underwater on Byblos or these are underwater on Verger, but they look incredible. And it looks even better in the videos they've shared, where you can see the seaweed moving around as they swim under the water. Obviously this isn't complete, as you can see the engineer doesn't quite move properly under the water, and we've also been told that there'll be swimming animations in the future, so I presume the engineer will actually be swimming through this water, rather than just flying around here like it's space. But even still, these underwater images and videos make it look like that the planets in Space Engineers 2 are going to be just as detailed underwater as they are on the land, and I personally cannot wait to explore these depths. They've told us that these oceans are going to be 20 kilometers deep, which is a lot deeper than real life oceans on our planet. And additionally, there's going to be these large vertical shafts that connect the shallower parts of the ocean on Byblos to what they refer to as the abyss below, and that the deeper you go, there'll be less and less vegetation until it's entirely barren under the water, and that at these depths, there are going to be underwater caves, which are currently planned to connect to this abyss. Now, this could be me reading this wrong, but I'm not the only person who's took this reading from this. But the way they refer to the abyss, rather than it being the abysses in deep water, it kind of sounds like the abyss is a place, like a big underground ocean or something like that. I'm not saying that is the case, it could just be worded weird, but the fact that it says in theory these caves should connect to cracks leading into the abyss, and additionally that there are these so-called blue holes, vertical shafts that connect shallow water directly to the abyss below, it kind of indicates potentially that this abyss is a separate place. We spoke about on this channel before that there are loading screens that suggest there is a mystery in the depths of Byblos, so potentially this abyss is that mystery, or at least part of it, or potentially I'm reading too much into the word abyss. I don't know, the two paragraphs that mention it are on screen now. Why don't you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. They've also shown off these crystals here, which you can see in the bottom left, say underwater crystals. And they've said, because there's no vegetation in the depths of Byblos, that they want to add these crystals underground to make it more visually interesting, and to make it look like the area under there isn't just completely barren, which it technically should be, and they mention this. But they also say it doesn't look complete if it is empty. The question is, do these crystals actually do anything? Or will they just be visual? Having a resource you need to progress in the depths of Byblos would be a very good thing for the progression of Space Engineers 2. But they've also said that this is something they're toying with doing and haven't actually done yet, so it sounds like this isn't an intentional part of progression, it's just something they're experimenting with for visuals instead. As I mentioned on my video on the Space Engineers 2 roadmap, which released at the end of last year, I mentioned that the water update and the multiplayer update were being worked on side by side, and whichever one was completed first will be released first. And currently, we know nothing about the multiplayer update. We know that NPCs are coming in this update as well, but the beginning of NPCs, just like how the beginning of wheels are going to be added in 2.2 and then finish in 2.3, but we don't know much more than that. They have shown us that they're working on the animations for NPCs. You can see on this one here, they're rigging the NPCs in order to do animations with them. And additionally, they've shown rigging for the faces, so they're able to make characters emote, and more importantly, so they're able to make characters speak. So when NPCs are added to the game and they talk to you, you can actually see their lips moving. This would be especially important for things like cutscenes, because if you've seen the Space Engineers 2 intro cutscene, it's just a lot of characters standing around and looking at each other, and this is because they don't have animations in place and they don't have lip sync in place. So when those two things are fully implemented, they'll be able to go over this intro cutscene again and make it look a bit more dynamic and interesting. But whilst that's great and all, this doesn't really tell us anything about NPCs or multiplayer. This NPC here that they're messing around with animations for is a character in their files that's called Spira, but whilst we haven't really spoke about them before, I also don't really know what that means, so perhaps that's for a future lore video that we can talk about that. But outside of that, we don't know anything else. But if we do find out anything new about multiplayer or NPCs, or anything else to do with Space Engineers 2, you know I will definitely be covering it here. So if you want to keep up to date with everything to do with Space Engineers 2, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel, as we will definitely cover it here. And if you want to go the extra mile and support this channel, you can do so by becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member with the links in the description below.